So welcome to today's presentation on the issues of vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. I'm Dr. Hugh Clark, and I'm the chair of the social work department at Florida Gulf Coast University, but I work very closely with the Southeast Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center. That's a mouthful to say there, but with the Stoops Center for Communities, Families, and Children there at Florida State. But they've asked me today to talk about three concepts that really impact anyone in any type of helping profession. And even though my area is in social work, this really applies across the board for anyone who is in a profession that must work with people during traumatic experiences, or if they work with someone over a long period of time doing clinical work, but it can be physical trauma, emotional trauma, environmental trauma, which has become very much a thing these days. And so dealing with persons who are experiencing all of these requires us to be healthy ourselves. And at times, we lose that focus as helpers. We become, either traumatized or stressed out, burned out. And so today we really want to focus on those issues and think about what they are, but also begin at a fairly rudimentary level to talk about ways to cope. So here's the agenda for the rest of the day, or this session here, is I'm going to be talking about vicarious trauma, talk about some of the signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma, and then talk about compassion fatigue, some of the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue, burnout, same thing, signs and symptoms, then some of the causes and factors of those. But also talking about some coping mechanisms that we need to develop. Now, one of the things that I really want to, as we get into the issue of coping mechanisms, is to understand that what I'm going to be talking about today is really what you do after some of these things have happened. But I also want to bring to the table the idea that we need to do prevention when we're talking about these three things: vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, or burnout. And there are some preventative things that can take place as a helper that will keep us from experiencing these in very severe ways. So let's talk about vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is simply defined as it's kind of the harmful, impactful changes that really occur in the helping professional's view about themselves or about others, or even broader, the world. Because when we are exposed to graphic and traumatic experiences of our clients, that impacts us. We're in the helping professions, and yes, we want to help, but we know that we have all experienced trauma in some form in our lives. And when we are continually working with clients who are traumatized, then that is going to change our perspective of ourselves, others, and also, the world at large. We can look at some of the things that are going on right now across the world and understand that the trauma that we are seeing, and we're bombarded with it on the TV and in the news media, of course, and we experience that and we think, oh my gosh. And there's a reason that the TV shows, the newscasters are saying, just so you know, this is explicit material. You need to know that this is coming up, because when we are exposed to this constantly, we can become traumatized ourselves. Now, the vicarious trauma is similar in some ways to secondary trauma, but just slightly different. Secondary trauma is much more time defined. It happens when you hear about or see someone have firsthand trauma and an experience of trauma that they tell you about, or you might possibly see it, but that is a kind of transitory type of trauma. You see it, you experience, you feel it, but then you're able to move forward and deal with your own feelings. Vicarious trauma goes deeper, and it represents really a complete shift in your own attitudes and worldview. It can change how you think about yourself in terms of how you respond to people. Are you helping enough? And did you do enough in that situation? It can also create negative feelings about what's going on in the world. And I think that's one thing that we're probably, a lot of us, experiencing in today's world with some of the kinds of things that are happening politically and across the international spectrum. And we hear about it and it impacts us. So some of the signs of vicarious trauma, and I probably won't go through the whole list, but we often will feel some anger, rage, or sadness about what's going on with our patients or clients, it doesn't just go away, much like the secondary trauma experience. This continues to linger and fester within the helping professional mind, and you can't let it go in many cases with vicarious trauma. You will also see signs or symptoms by becoming too involved, overly involved with a client, because you have seen how emotionally traumatized that client is, and you want to help them, but what you're doing is taking on their trauma and going beyond what is the normal realm of the helping profession. So we can also see feelings of guilt, shame, our own self-doubt. Did I not do enough? What did I do wrong in helping these people? Because I'm still feeling traumatized, and I must not be doing enough with this client or these clients. So it can really impact the way we feel about ourselves and the way we go about doing practice or helping people, whether you're an EMT, a nurse, a social worker. We often feel sort of second guess what we have done and whether it has been effective. We can also begin to over-identify with patients and clients, because what we do is we are taking on their trauma and trying in some ways to take it away from them, but we aren't able to do that. Now, and other signs and symptoms are distancing yourself, staying away from patients, because your trauma has become so great, you're really not able to help people, and you find ways to avoid helping the clients. So that is a sign that you may be experiencing vicarious trauma. If you're not willing to listen, stop and listen to the clients as they share their experiences, that probably means you're building up a barrier to being able to help those clients because of your own symptoms of vicarious trauma. And that then leads to that whole issue of boundaries. And every one of us in the helping professions, no matter what profession you are in, we often find ourselves having difficult times with boundaries. Boundaries help us to take care of ourselves, but ultimately they help us take care of our clients as well. And if we cannot maintain those professional boundaries, then we lose our effectiveness with our clients, and we will overextend. We will go the extra mile with the client and do too much in some ways. I know that's hard for us to say, but it goes outside the normal bounds of what we in our helping profession should be doing. So we need to be aware of those signs and symptoms as we're moving forward in our helping with clients. So now we're going to move on to compassion fatigue. And this has become quite the catchphrase for us in the social work profession and other professions as well. I hear it from nurses. I hear it from others who are out there on the front lines helping clients with, the trauma that they're experiencing. And this becomes a longer and much more drawn out process or impact on you as a helper, because we are constantly bombarded with, and we experience the trauma of helping others, and we become overwhelmed by that constant exposure to the trauma that our clients have experienced. So as a result, what we tend to do is we go through some of those symptoms of vicarious trauma, and we tend to break down those barriers and not have good, appropriate professional boundaries that we should have, so that we then develop this process. And the thing to remember is compassion fatigue is a process. It's not a one-time instance of such as the secondary trauma experience. Compassion fatigue begins and builds over time. It is a process. It really does, as the quote here says, it takes time to develop. It keeps building up slowly to a point where you really lose the sense of care for yourself and for others. You are just worn out in terms of helping anyone else. And you've overused your compassion skills, your reserves, and you really don't have much to provide. There's the saying that, how can you fill someone else's glass if your glass is empty? Well, that's what compassion fatigue is all about. When our glasses as helpers become empty, there is no way that we can effectively help someone else. So compassion fatigue is very damaging to you as a professional, but ultimately to the relationship you have with your clients. So some of the symptoms, you see the physical ones: physical, psychological, emotional exhaustion. When you leave work at the end of the day, it's not an, oh boy, I feel better now. You continue to feel exhausted. There's a sense of helplessness, anomie, hopelessness, powerlessness. You don't think you can get the job done because you're totally and completely exhausted. You have nothing to give. It can lead to anger, sadness. You can also lose contact with your friends, with kind of your environment, because you don't have a sense of pleasure in getting together with people, doing things. You lose that sense of pleasure in activities. And then what happens in our head is that we start ruminating, thinking over and over about how people are suffering, and you start to feel anger toward all the things that are causing the suffering. I think, again, I go back to some of the things that are happening in today's world, in Israel and Palestine, and we begin to get angry at, it can be either side of the conflict there. We will get angry, and that impacts how we then see the people that are right next to us and we are working with. So that's important. But another really important thing to know is that at the sort of end stage of compassion fatigue, you really feel like you have not been able to accomplish what you wanted in the profession, in the helping profession that you were in. So this is a large picture kind of thing that happens, and it will totally change the way you perceive the world. It may change your, the slide says, your spirituality or religious views. People who experience compassion fatigue to the extreme may absolutely give up any kind of spirituality which they have held to over time. So those kinds of things are really symptoms that you need to watch out for. But don't forget the physical symptoms. The physical symptoms include changes in appetite, sleep disturbances, nausea, dizziness, lots of different things. If you've done any work with persons who suffer from depression, this is a similarity here, because in many ways, compassion fatigue leads to the same kinds of personal feelings that someone who suffers from depression has. And normally, for many people, they would not consider themselves depressed, but their compassion fatigue leads them to have symptoms very much like the person who is suffering from depression. So then we'll talk about burnout. This is kind of the last phase here, and this really is where it gets extreme. This is a result of long-term, chronic, usually non-supportive work environments. This happens in the work environment in most cases, and that is important for us to remember. Now, we can get burnout in lots of different areas, but what we really talk about here is that non-supportive work environment that doesn't allow us to take care of ourselves. It doesn't give us downtime. And it doesn't really help us in managing the stress that we face here. The classic example of this is people, and I've worked with many of them as students and then as professionals as well, who work in the Department of Children and Families, Child Protective Services. They're often in work environments where they have too many cases, not enough support, and they will tend to burn out. And what happens, as we've seen across the country, is a lot of job turnover. It's very hard to keep people for more than 3 or 4 years in child protective work. And so that's a sign that they burn out very quickly. In some jobs, it may take longer, but in some that are high stress, like child protective, it can happen very fast. It can also happen in other professions, nursing. We know that nurses, because of the constantness of their position and the work that they do, they burn out. And we've lost a lot of nurses over the past couple or 3 years with the impact of COVID and how much stress and strain they were under at the workplace, trying to take care of all of these people who were coming in, beds in the halls, beds in conference rooms, and they were trying to take care of everybody and not being able to take care of themselves. And even though I think in most cases, the medical facilities tried to help, they just couldn't keep up with the need for the people who were caring for those patients. And so burnout really showed itself in that time. Now, we need to know that burnout, you can see it with lack of energy. You distance yourself from your job. You check out at the job mentally. You also have negativity toward the job, and that impacts, everything that you do. It impacts your relationships at the job. It impacts your work at the job. So all of those things are important to note about burnout. And so you no longer become efficient and effective in your work. So remember, this is generally particularly related to one's work or professional setting. Now, we have some symptoms here as well. A lot of them will be very similar. We have physical symptoms, and those are, we can, I would never say these are psychosomatic. These are real, because this is what happens when a person has reached the stage of burnout. They have physical signs of headaches, stomach aches, intestinal issues. They're tired all the time. again, you go back to understanding or comparing this to depression, and you see there's a lot of similarity there in terms of the physical symptoms that we note with depression. Then the same thing with emotional symptoms, feeling helpless, being cynical about your job, about the world, about the community you live in. And you also have this feeling of not being able to do your job well. So there's this sort of pull from both sides. You want to do your job well, but you just feel like you can't. And so that only increases this level of frustration you have, which increases the likelihood of burnout. So we see that sense of failure, decreased satisfaction with almost everything. And one of the things to note as a helper, and if you're getting to the stage of burnout, think about and really stay tuned to how it's impacting you and your relationships with your family and friends, because that is a big thing that really happens with people who have burned out in their job. It spills over. We in social work like to talk about a systems theory. A change in one part of the environment changes another part of the environment. And obviously, if you're facing burnout, it's going to impact and spill over into your family relationships, your personal relationships. So be aware that it's a bigger picture than just what's happening to me. It's happening to you, but also your family, your children, your friends and neighbors. So be aware of those kinds of things, because you'll start feeling alone and detached from all of those people that I just mentioned. And there's no motivation. And so when you've reached the stage of burnout, it really means you're really got to get some help moving forward to get out of this point in your life. And so many people will, it's the old fight or flight kind of issue. They will run from it. They'll look for new jobs, and instead of trying to deal with the issues they're facing in that job right now. So the behavioral signs: reduced performance, your effectiveness, your efficiency drop to next to nothing. Again, that withdrawal, isolation. You want to be alone all the time, and coping with it in maybe inappropriate ways. Also, procrastination, putting things off. And even though some of us are natural born procrastinators, it really becomes worse when burnout has really taken its hold on you. And then the last one I really want to focus on, because the coping mechanism that's sometimes used are substances. It can be alcohol, other types of drugs. It can really be something that people turn to as they are really trying to cope with their burnout, but in fact, what they're doing is counterproductive, and it creates more isolation, more sense of failure or self-doubt. So that's a really vicious cycle to get into, and one we need to be aware of and watch for. So what are some of the causes? Obviously, there are things that you know about: having little or no control over your work, lack of recognition, just outstanding or over demanding job expectations. I mentioned CPS and the large cases. So many people face that in so many types of jobs. Monotonous work, when you're in a high pressure environment, and some of the helpers, such as nurses, EMTs, those are high pressure jobs that really can burn them out very quickly. The same with social workers, psychologists, and mental health counselors. All of those things are high pressure. You're trying to help everyone else, but sometimes forgetting to take care of yourself. Then some of the lifestyle causes: working too much. If you're working more than 40 hours a week, I suggest pulling back. If you're not socializing or relaxing, taking the time for self-care then you need to structure that in. Then lack of supportive relationships. Then, of course, one of the things that the studies are coming out almost on a daily basis of how important getting good and adequate sleep is for, aging, slowing down the aging process, but it's also true for just general work and avoiding burnout, avoiding compassion fatigue. If you're not rested, then you increase the likelihood of all of these things. And then some of it falls back on us. Some of us have perfectionist tendencies, or you have a pessimistic view of the world and of yourself. And so those kinds of things can actually cause you to burn out even faster. If you're a person who needs to be in control, then that may be a factor as well. So all of those that, and we've talked about, and I'm a little bit reticent to use it, that type A personality can cause the issues with burnout. So some of the coping mechanisms, and this is a short list. And like I said, one of the things I really would stress is prevention. Try as much as possible to start some of these things before you reach the level of compassion fatigue or burnout. The number one thing here that I think is important is reach out to others. We talk about friends, colleagues, and community groups, but for many of us, we need to have a support group of co-workers that you can talk to about the work, but also you can talk and engage with outside of the work and kind of keep it separate. That's a little bit difficult, but I think it's very important. We also need to be willing to use good supervision. When you're starting to feel some of these symptoms, go to your supervisor and talk to them about the symptoms that you're feeling. That way, mechanisms can be put in place in the workplace to help you. Wellness programs at work, all kinds of things are now being utilized more and more. Take advantage of those things. So you really have to begin to reframe the way your outlook on the world and on your work and your home life. All of those things are required for us to move beyond this. Think about reprioritizing, taking more breaks, taking time off, taking breaks during the day. I dare say that so many of us, and I will be the first to admit, I eat my lunch at my desk, looking at papers and different things here at the university. And I'm told over and over by my friends and colleagues, stop that. And I say, well, I've just got to get this done. That's not good for me. And I think a lot of us in the helping professions, we just grab a sandwich, keep going. And that is the worst thing to do. Take regular breaks. Take the time that is your time. Make it your time. Own it. And then find something that's interesting. Find a hobby, something that you can do that takes your mind off of work, off of the stress, off of the trauma that you have seen, or even some that you've experienced yourself. Find something that is almost totally unrelated to the job. If you play an instrument, take time and play that instrument, play a piano, play a violin, guitar, whatever. Do it to nourish your creativity, as the slide says. That's an important thing to do. Take that time. Then physical activity, walking, running, biking, anything like that will help. We know too much about the fact that it creates, activity in the brain when you're doing activities such as running or walking. I used to be a runner all the time, and I love that kind of runner's high that I got when I was running. Those days are way past me now, but anyway, that's another issue. But finding some physical activity to take you away from the ongoing mental games we play with ourselves about the stress, the trauma, and things that we have seen. So also, and again, the last thing here, you'll see it repeated all over, eating right. And I will be the first to admit that I'm guilty of just going in, if I'm tired and stressed, grabbing a bag of chips and a bowl of queso or salsa and just stress eating. And you've probably used that term yourself. Oh, I'm stress eating. Well, that's not a good thing. A healthy diet. And instead of stress eating chips and salsa, try some vegetables or something, make changes in that, and it really will make a difference in your life. And then that other one that I've already mentioned, and the other is getting good sleep and good quality sleep. Figuring out a way to do that and take care of yourself. All of these things are important in terms of coping. Like I said, wellness programs, mindfulness techniques, meditation, all of those things are important for us to come down from and move away from the stressors that are impacting us in our work and the helping that we do for others. We've got to take care of ourselves. If we don't do that, then guaranteed you can't take care of anyone else. So find the coping mechanisms that work for you to avoid compassion fatigue, to avoid as much as possible vicarious trauma. That one's a hard one to avoid, but dealing with it, you've got to have some coping mechanisms. And then burnout, find the coping mechanisms that either prevent or help you as you're going through it. So I think all of these things are important. As a helper, we've got to be willing to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our clients. Thank you all. There's a few references here for you to look at. Some of the information came from these references, but I appreciate your time, and I hope this has been helpful. And I know there are going to be several other modules that you'll be able to see that give you more information on some of these topics. Have a great day. Thanks.
If you want to just start by telling us about yourself, your background, and really the nature of your work.
Sure. So my name is Jamie Earp. I'm the assistant chief in Decatur County. And I've been in this position about 4 years now. Prior to doing that, I was on worked full time as a firefighter, and then kind of moonlighted with EMS. I worked, about 8 days a month with them. So a 24/48 provides you about 24, or does provide 24 and 48 off for our schedules, which gives you about 10 days of working days a month. So I was almost full-time ambulance, full-time fire department. So I've done that for about 9 years with that schedule. Probably a little bit lighter than that in the years prior. So in that, I've just educational wise, I've kind of focused on my fire department career, EMS instructor, fire instructor, and then various different instructors, certificates and license along the way. So the service that I currently work with, we were running about 8,000 calls a year. From the ambulance, we were considerably less than that from the fire department standpoint, but we do run fire and EMS med calls from this department. More of an assist to EMS type situation. We've got a current EMR, EMT, AMT programs that we teach, and then have been successful in creating students and employees and just licensed providers for the field. So truly have had some experience with a lot of the things that you're interested in talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, we're very happy and excited to have you on here today.
And excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us just kind of in focusing on burnout, on vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, just what specific aspects of your work and the colleagues that you work with involves potential exposure and just puts you at higher risk for all of these topics, right? For experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma.
I think it's multifaceted, and I think it's beyond just opioid epidemics. I think when you talk about my last shift on an ambulance, so we ran three designated 911 trucks, and we ran 23 out of 24 hours that shift. So and we're not the only department. That's not the only time that's happened. That happens often, and our men and women are constantly exposed to long hours and a multitude of different patients. Some are some abuse the system, or that's the way it feels, and then you have a multitude of patients who truly need the service that they're calling for. Unfortunately, that happens on the back of a long distance transfer, or that happens on the back of your third call in a row, and you haven't seen the station, you haven't eaten anything. It's been 12 hours. So to me, you have to be pretty specific in what you're talking about, because burnout is that stress, and it's been building up and building up and building up. That's that accumulated stress, and there's never any downtime. There's never any break in that stress, and the stressors are always there. And to me, when you're at work, and you're running 23 out of 24 hours, where do you find downtime? Where does that first off acute stress, and then you have the stress that's been with you from dealing with your children at home, or your spouse, or loved one, or the car broke down, or whatever it is. You have those life stressors, and then you have the things that just constantly come in a 911 service. So or even a transport service like some of the ones run. So I remember this guy, he was a good friend of mine. He was on an ambulance, and he come into work one morning, and he was talking to me. I was checking the truck off, and he said, "Well, went to the doctor yesterday." I said, "Man, what happened?" He said, "Well, a couple days ago, I had a seizure on the ambulance." He was in the patient compartment with a patient, and he went and seen the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, look, tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about what happened that day." So he starts explaining to the doctor all the things that he went through and his day. And he said, "Well, tell me what you ate." And he said, "Well, I had some fried chicken, and then I drank 5 energy drinks." The doc said, "Did you sleep last night?" He said, "Yeah, I slept about 4 hours." The doc said, "Well, did you smoke?" And he said, "Yeah, I smoked." And he said, "Well, that's a pretty bad combination." And he said, "Well, doc, that was a light day." So when I think about the people that deal with this and what they have to go through, and kind of getting through the day, it is a lot of stressors within a 24-hour cycle. And then again, the stress at home, and you can kind of see where people get to the feeling burnout. I think the problem isn't the burnout, Savannah. I think the problem is not recognizing that you are burning out. That becomes the problem, because the burnout is common. That's just a normal feeling to what would be an abnormal situation. Now, the vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, sure, you deal with the vicarious trauma. Sure, you deal with so many bad situations as a provider, as a firefighter, as an EMT, as a law enforcement officer, military. You deal with people's bad days so often in very traumatic situations. You can kind of see why people would take that home, or how they would start to adopt and take on those feelings that somebody else has, because of just the absolute exposure to it. And then compassion fatigue, you deal with the same thing so many times. It's highs and lows and highs and lows and highs and lows, and I think it just eventually becomes the middle, right? Does that make sense, Savannah?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, and you hit the nail right on the head with you gave great examples, of your colleague who had the seizure, and then going to the doctor talking about his day today, and that being a light day. I think that really puts it in perspective for those of us who have never worked in this field before, right? In fire EMS. And I think it's a very common, no matter what profession, that we don't recognize when we are burning out, just like you were talking about. We hit the breaking point and then we're like, oh crap, right? That's the first time we're recognizing, like, I need help. And it is really important. It comes with our job that we are just at higher risk because of the nature of the work. And we need to be aware of those signs within ourselves so that we can be very proactive in managing it. I think it's a lot easier to manage it and to prevent it from happening versus once you are at that point, it's hard once you get to that breaking point, right? And then bringing yourself out of that. Not impossible, and you can absolutely, right, recover and come out of it for sure. But I think that it really does empower people to have the knowledge of the signs so that they can be proactive and know how to manage it.
And to your point, Savannah, that it's also important to be surrounded by people who help you identify those feelings, right? Because sometimes it's tough to identify something that's going wrong in you, especially when you're not trying to observe that behavior change. Whereas somebody who's a friend or a trusted confidant is someone who could and very will look at a situation and objectively say, hey, look, here's what I think's changed. Here's where I think you need to go. Here's what I think you need to work on. One of my mentors, and if I'm getting long with stories, I just don't want you to say, hey, look, we're getting long. But he told me, he's like, I realized there was a change one day when I was at home and my wife said, we take trash out. And I said, sure, I'll take trash out. He said, and 2 minutes later, she said, hey, seriously, we've got people that's coming here in a minute. I want you to take the trash out. And he said, I jumped up and I cussed at her and I grabbed the trash and I went to the door and I went out the door. And he said, I was halfway down. He said, driveway was it felt like 6 miles away, especially as he was thinking back through how he had just acted. And that entire walk, he said, the only thing he could think was, why did I act like that? That was so unlike me. He said, I come back in the house, my wife told her, said, look, that's unusual. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to reach out to somebody and talk to him. And he did. And, he started working through, some things for him that were kind of built up and problematic, events, calls he had worked, and then, the amount of time he had worked. Long and short there is that, we are exposed to things that are going to create those feelings. And for him, he was lucky enough to recognize an odd behavior, but somebody else that's suffering through some type of problem might not recognize the fact that they started taking more medication or started drinking a little bit more, or, there was a subtle change in something that was normal. It's not drinking a beer that's a problem. If you come home every day and you drink a beer, and this may be something you want to edit out, but at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, that's normal behavior. That's what you do every day. You drink a beer at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. But you start finding yourself coming home and drinking 3 beers every day at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 beers between 2 days or something. That's an abnormal behavior. And that is something you have to watch out for in those changes. And again, having a good peers, good group of coworkers, and strong friends will absolutely be beneficial to somebody who's going through something. They will help identify the situation. So Savannah, I just wanted to acknowledge your point. I think it's a phenomenal point.
Absolutely. I think that I was going to say that your colleague that's awesome that they recognized it within themselves. I think a lot of people can attribute that to the current situation that's happening, right? And say, I just got frustrated because that made me upset, right? And we don't realize what's underneath it, that 90% of our reaction is because of all the things that built up to that point, right? It's not the current situation. It wasn't his wife. It was actually the behind the scenes, right? And where he was at mentally, emotionally, and just his well-being. So that's amazing that he had, or she had, the awareness there, right? To be able to come back into his wife and say, hey, I don't know why I reacted that way. I'm so sorry. And I'm going to now go and get help or do something about it. Right. And talking about the indicators, right? The signs of experiencing burnout or experiencing compassion fatigue, or vicarious trauma, any of those three. Are there any other signs that you've recognized within yourself or your colleagues that are like, hey, check engine lights, right? That this is happening?
Sure. For me, I think, I'm not a very aggressive person in that, violence is something that I would put first as my first line of action. And I remember I was working, at the time I was probably working about, 2 full-time jobs, like in that I was working 10 hours at the EMS service, 10 hours at fire service, and only had about 10 days off a month. And that was tough. That was a lot of work. And then, between the call volumes and the not getting any sleep and then coming to work, I remember thinking, I come to work one day and my cell phone charger was missing. And I remember getting so angry that I was like, man, if I could find out who done this, I feel like I could punch him in the face. And it sounds so ridiculous. You think, well, what a weird reaction to a cell phone charger. But really what it was just, I was so burnt out. I was so tired. I was so fatigued from working that abnormal reaction was just a reaction based on the amount of energy I had, based on the amount of patience I had, and whether people believe it or not, it's easy to fall into a trap where you work, especially in today's society where people. I'd read a study, and I wish I could, or a poll. I wish I could remember where it was, but it showed that like 73% of the people who had a full-time job were currently seeking part-time work, and that of the people who had a full-time and a part-time job, like 30-something% of those people were looking for a third job. So when you talk about today's society, is it really just an EMS, fire, first responder situation? I would say that this is a good message for anyone who is trying to just survive and make a living with the way things are. So signs in myself was I was quick to anger, where that would be an abnormal behavior for me. I noticed I had a change in my appetite. Many of those differences you see, and I apologize about the phone. There's no way to shut it off. But many of those changes that you see in really anything, any aspect should be questioned when you have that much on you. If there's a deviation from center, I think you need to look in it, Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you keep on using the word abnormal. I think that is really important when it comes to identifying how we are all uniquely impacted, right? Because it's going to show up differently in every person depending on our norm. And thank you for sharing just your personal experiences with it, right? Being more quick to anger, being more reactive, and also the change in appetite. Absolutely. You touched on this earlier, just with the example that you gave of your colleague who reacted in a upset way, right, to their wife. Can you talk about some of the impacts that burnout and compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma does have on your personal life, and relationships outside of work?
Sure. Let me ask you this question. Where does something like PTSD fall in those categories? And I'm relying on you. I would consider you more of an expert there.
It would be under vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma has the exact same signs and symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder. Exact same. And I didn't want
to kind of speculate at that. I think these are too important to kind of guess at. So, when you look at something like PTSD, I think when I go back to my mentor, the guy I was talking about earlier, and his wife, and the trash, and the trash very well was just, it was a catalyst, right? It was just the thing that created the anger, or gave the anger a place to go. He had dealt with a child death. He had dealt with an elderly death, but the way the elderly person had died, he remembered going there and seeing it and thinking, well, this is terrible. This shouldn't happen. And in his mind, he had kind of already worked through that. And he didn't even recognize the symptoms of the PTSD, the vicarious trauma, until it was something that was demonstrated. It was something that was displayed, and now he is one of the people that goes around with the critical incident stress debriefing teams for other departments and leads peer-to-peer or peer-to-group events. So he's super smart and super aware of these things. However, I always think back to, what if he wasn't? How far would that have went? What if he didn't have the information he needed to pursue this? So I know I'm getting a little wide off topic, and I'm just going to say this, and I'll come right back to it, is when I see people who or talk to people who go through these events and it's afterwards, it's always interesting to kind of see the progression of how they go through it, right? The first thing they do is once they recognize it, it's almost like the aha moment. It's like, oh man, I would have never even, or yeah, I knew that was a thing that bothered me. And it was, it's something they kind of have to start work through, recognize, look for symptoms, and then find a way to move past it. For me, early on, we worked a call where there was a structure fire. And we arrived at the residence. We went inside. It was a search and rescue. Excuse me. And we went to the structure. We found the gentleman. We got the gentleman out. The problem was, this was probably one of my first calls. And I remember the entire call. I still remember the entire call. And we went to the house, we got the guy out. Of course, he was deceased. And for a long time, that call bothered me, but I never knew why. Like I'd hear a call that sounded similar to that, and I would go, okay, well, is this going to be like something we've already seen? Is this going to be the exact same thing? Gosh, I hope, we get there in time. We get dressed in time. We are able to go inside and rescue him. Knowing very well that there's a multitude of factors that would play into how different that call is going to be. Which apparatus was there, where the call is located, how far along the structure fire was, what personnel showed up on scene. Like, there was no way that was going to be the exact same call, but in my mind, I would play, all right, we've dealt with this before. What went wrong? Well, that was something I carried home. That was something that it kind of bothered me, but I let it go, and I eventually figured out how to pass that on. And then about 5-6 years after that, we worked a 16-year-old that passed away in a vehicle accident. And we got there, and we just couldn't get the doors off the vehicle. The car was so damaged, we just couldn't get into the vehicle. Everything we done was bad. Everything we worked on, everything we touched was bad. We just couldn't, and we just tried as hard as we could. And the vehicle was just so destroyed that it was a process. And that 16-year-old died while we were in the process of extrication. Now, the men and women on that call that day, I want to be completely honest, done an amazing job, the best of the best. They were truly doing a phenomenal job. However, we were just behind the eight. It wasn't a standard pull up, pop the door, pull the kid out, move on. And I remember holding the kid's hand when he passed away. And the thing that bothered me about that, well, of course, was that a child died. That's terrible. That's terrible. But the thing was, I always wondered, what could we have done better? And that turned into almost an unhealthy event of sending me to the junkyard, cutting on cars, trying to recreate that environment, trying to see if we could have done better, because that was something that had triggered, could we have done better? Should we have done better? And then for years, I would think about that call. It would cross my mind. And then I'd say, hey, I think I'm going to have my mixed drink tonight. But I'd only do that when I thought about that kid, and I don't know where it come from. I don't know what triggered that way of thinking. And then eventually I said, I never pieced it together, and it seems silly now to say it, but I never put together that those two, every time I thought about him, I just want to go get a mixed drink and I'd move on with my life. And then I went and reached out to the guy actually that I was talking about earlier at the trash can. I said, look, man, this is happening. And we sit down and had a moment where he was like, well, look, here's some things you need to identify. Did it create any real havoc in my life? It didn't. I tend to keep my feelings to myself. It wasn't until the last probably 3 or 4 years that I become more open and willing to have those conversations. Maybe again, like you said, the stigma that's surrounding, having those open conversations in the fire service or whatever, EMS, whatever it is. And so I personally was able to, have that conversation and kind of mitigate my problems. But the symptom very much was that when I would think about this kid, I would want to stop thinking about the kid dying. And again, who wouldn't want to stop thinking about a 16-year-old perishing in a car wreck? Right. I'm done, Savannah. I apologize.
No, don't apologize at all. I love the stories, the real life experiences that you are sharing, because I think that we learn the best when we do hear those personal experiences. So I really do appreciate you being open and honest and sharing this with us. And just kind of going into the steps, the strategies that you and your colleagues have taken once you have that aha moment, right? To be able to take care of yourself, to be able to recover and make sure that it's not impacting your personal life, your relationships, as well as your performance in your job, right? The quality of work that you're doing for your clients. Are there any steps or strategies that you or your colleagues have taken to be able to manage it or to recover once you have that aha moment?
No, I think that's a super great question. I don't think that's a really, and I don't think there's really a complicated answer there. I think that the first thing that people had to do was realize that there was a problem. There's an issue, right? And like you addressed, once that aha moment took place, then what took place? Well, it was the act of healing, and I think that process of healing took place because people were able to have conversations. So for us, we worked a fatality not long ago where there was a mother and her small children that perished in a car fire after a crash. And we had firefighters leaving the scene, and they were upset. They were crying. We were extricating these people for extended periods of time due to the accident, due to the car fire itself. And that's a delicate subject because you're handling the remains of a small child, and I say sub 10 years old, and then the older one was I think 12, so I think they were 8 and 12 years old, and so my point is those things, that bad day for somebody is a terrible day, something that we hope we never live through. But these providers, these first responders, that bad day may happen 3 times in one shift. Right. And it's a terrible thing to keep being exposed to. So when you talk about the barriers and how they work through it, the identification of the issue, of course, and then open dialogue. So after that accident, we gathered up as a group, and then we done our after action. We kind of broke it down. We gave it some time. We done our after action. And the first thing we done was sit down to try to identify what could we have done better. And through the identification of what we could have done better, we identified that really it was a very good operation. It was just, we actually saved a small child's life, a child that would have perished in that car fire because of how well those people done working to get on scene, to get there quick, to extinguish the fire. They're able to save a life. And it's a tragedy, Savannah. It is an absolute tragedy to deal with the loss of human life. I can underline that, italicize, and put an exclamation mark behind it. And that's a bad, terrible thing. But at what point did we stop measuring the value of saving that one? We had already lost, but there was a life saved. And my point is, in that conversation, in that after action, that was kind of the subject. That was the conversation of, what did we do good? How do we get that right? Yes, there was bad. Could we have overcome it? Could we have done better? But also the identification of, look, we saved a life. Here's how we saved that life. here's why that was a successful operation. So we weighed the good and the bad. And then we continued that dialogue after we recognized that there was an issue, after we had the conversation about it. And then we just kind of all followed up in a week, in a couple of weeks, having conversations about what we needed to talk about, which was the accident, and then, the things that surrounded it, and then their personal feelings. So in the event that something would have went wrong and those people might not have had an output or a place to talk, or a way to express how they feel, because that's generally the hardest issue, is getting people to talk openly. Once you started getting them through that, maintaining that conversation and not letting it die off. And then if somebody weren't able to express themselves to you, to make sure they had a place to go and express themselves, and that they had people they can talk to via phone, via in-person conversations, or a Zoom meeting like this, that just the means to communicate. Because in my opinion, of course, this is completely anecdotal, but in my opinion, the biggest return we've ever seen in people was when they had an opportunity to be people, right? Not robots. They had a chance to share their feelings and have dialogue and say, hey man, this really bothered me. This was a really bad experience. This is how I feel right now. Hey, I keep having reoccurring dreams. And this is what's going on in those dreams. I keep seeing this. Every time I close my eyes, I think about, that child, or I think about the accident, or whatever it is. The barriers that faced was probably communication, and keeping that dialogue open and honest was a big key, and being able to help people kind of surpass those feelings they were feeling right then.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's a huge relief when we are able to talk about it, right? And what we are feeling and thinking internally, versus the stress of actively holding it back and holding it inside of us, right? It sounds like you have had, or your organization altogether, you and your colleagues really have a lot of support from each other, and taking that time to really debrief and to talk about the really hard cases that you have had. And that's really, if you think about therapy, me as a therapist, when you are processing with a client, you're really talking about your experience, right? You're doing exactly what you talked about you guys do together as a team. You talk about, I'm telling myself that we could have done better. Well, let's break it down. Let's look at if we could have, right? And all of that allows us to really reframe and challenge the belief that we are telling ourselves, that story we're telling ourselves, right? And that can make a huge difference. Is there any routine practices that you have adopted within your day-to-day that really promote your self-care and your well-being and your resilience within your job?
I think the biggest thing I do in my strategies, and I think what you ask is, are there things that I do to make sure that I don't fall back into the same traps that I've fallen into before? Right. So in that, the thing I do is I try to shut my day off. Right. At 5 o'clock, and that's not always the case, especially in my position. That's not always the case that you can just punch the clock, hit the door. There's issues or things, but I do try to keep that work-life balance. And I do try to keep a healthy work-life balance. And though I stay incredibly busy at home, that busyness at home is not sitting on my couch for 8 hours straight. And some people enjoy that. Is how they detox. That is how they unwind, is to watch television, whatever. I'm not judging that. I don't care. I think that's what's healthy for that person. For me, what I like to do is go build things with my hands. I like to go work on things. I like to construct, because so much of what we do is a reaction to a deconstruction of something. I thought it was, and we could put pretty words in front of it. I remember Elon Musk talked one time. They asked him how he thought about his rocket explode, and he said that wasn't an explosion. That was a rapid disassembly. Right. And I think when we put words together, it makes us feel pretty. But for me, going and actually physically touching and doing and being a part of something that's not the deconstruction of normality. And somebody asked me one time, what is normal? And I would say, that's the baseline of what most people are doing. Most people are not dealing with dead children. Most people are not dealing with opioids. Most people aren't dealing with that. We're not seeing that stuff. And as a first responder, we have a closer grasp, or at least a closer sight what's happening out there. Savannah, I think again, just to circle back, I like to do something that has a positive impact for me, right? Whether it has a positive impact for the rest of the world or not. That one moment is about satisfying what I need. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's unique to each person, right? What helps us decompress, what helps us feel that relief, what helps us have joy in those moments of peace, right? Resilience is going to be different for everybody. We all have activities that promote our resilience, and it's going to look different for each person. And for you, something that you really love, enjoy doing is working with your hands. So that I absolutely agree with you that it's really dependent on the person. But I think it's great to have an example of what someone else does to put that to mind and say, oh, I didn't realize that was my thing for myself. That really helps me. Well, I've got one last question for you to wrap up.
I think it's a great interview. And I really appreciate everything you got. So if you got 15 more questions, I got 15 more minutes. Yeah, I'm kidding.
Amazing. Well, we will end on just if there's any advice that you would give to other professionals who may be experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, who is navigating a lot, right, within their personal and professional life. Is there any advice that you would give to them?
I would start by just saying, watch out, pay attention to yourself, right? Keep an eye on the things that you do. Look for abnormal behavior. Pay attention to those things because sometimes they're microscopic. Sometimes it's just getting upset because your wife asked you to take the trash out, husband, whatever, asked you to take the trash out twice. And that is the trigger. That is the thing that sets you off. And if that's abnormal, if that's not normal behavior for you, right? We talked about different normal behaviors, but if that's abnormal, pay attention to it because generally, anecdotally, what I've seen is most of the time it's not just one thing. And when people start paying attention to the symptoms or the signs, they start saying, well, actually I've been doing this and I have been doing this. And, and the last time my kid come run up to me, pulls on my pants leg when I was on the phone, I just wanted to spank. I wanted to spank her. I wanted to yell. I mean, those are abnormal behaviors for you. And for the providers that are in the field, I would encourage them. I would implore them to pay attention to those signs. And then, don't be afraid to communicate, but you should also be careful who you communicate with. One of the things that I teach is, your three rights of communication. And that's your first right is, are you communicating to the right person? The second right is, are you communicating the right way? And third, are you communicating the right message? Right. So as a sender and a receiver in a relationship, if I'm sending Savannah a message, I need to make sure that Savannah is the person that needs to hear that message. Savannah can clearly understand what I'm trying to tell her. Hey, this is Savannah, you're my counselor. And here's something I've noticed, this big change in my life. All right. And then the third thing is I probably don't need to have a serious conversation with you via email. Maybe a conversation where you and I are looking each other in the face could be like this. Cell phones, sure, great. Having a phone conversation, landline, rotary phone, whatever. It doesn't matter. Maybe those are good, but I found that the in-person conversations tend to be something that's more honest, more raw. People can't generally tuck, again, anecdotally, people generally can't tuck behind their feelings in a face-to-face conversation. And they shouldn't, but I feel like with the men and women of these services, most of the time. I don't want to apply this to everybody because I don't want to offend everybody. I probably said some things that are going to make people want to call and complain, and that's fine. But the thing about it is we should definitely pay attention to those signs and symptoms, no matter who we are, and then make sure we communicate the right way to the right people, our feelings, and then what's happening. And then, if you're on the other side of that and somebody comes to you and they say, look, Savannah comes to Jamie and she says, hey, Jamie, this is the way I feel. I should be very careful with Savannah's feelings in that she's sharing something that's probably a little off-putting to share, right? It's probably something that's going to make her feel a little bit uncomfortable, and she's going to tiptoe into that conversation. And Savannah, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, because this is a conversation. But in my experience, I have to be gentle and understand that what they're telling me is something that they're choosing to share because they need to. They feel whatever they're holding on is to detriment of themselves. So they want to offload that and say, hey, look, Savannah wants to say, hey, Jamie, look, this is the way I feel. This is the thing that's pulling me down. And they want you to help them cut that rope. But if you're not careful, you can push them back the other direction. So if you run into a situation where somebody comes and has this conversation with them, listen, empathetically listen, and then get them to somebody who can help them. Help them understand that there's help out there. You're just not the one. You're not the best suit for them. And I think that's just as important as somebody coming and having the courage to share, because that's what it is also having the courage to understand that, rub some dirt in it might not be the best solution or best answer to give somebody who's kind of treading and high water, Savannah. So I welcome you to come back and tell me I'm wrong anywhere there. Absolutely.
No, I completely agree with you that awareness and that communication is absolutely key. And I really appreciate you sharing just those communication strategies, right? The different forms of and what goes into communication, and talking about being on the other side of that conversation, right? And how we can respond to someone who does come and confide in us, because really most likely our best friend, they trust us. The people we work with every single day, they trust us the most. So they are more likely going to come to us than to reach out to someone initially that they don't know, to a counselor and seek a stranger for their initial help, right? It normally, I would say, starts with someone that you do know and that you do confide in, and you say, hey, this is happening and I'm not sure why or what to do about it, right? So I really think that that's an important piece to this conversation of being on the receiving end of that and how to respond and help someone who is navigating it. And again, I just thank you for your time and for this conversation today, because I do believe it's a very important conversation, and I truly believe it's going to be very valuable for all of our viewers.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And y'all let me know if I can ever be a part of anything else you need any help with, or something I can, kind of give my input on. Again, it's just my experience in it, but I think what you're doing is a phenomenal thing, Savannah. So how can people get their hands on this? How can I share this with people, the series so far?
Yeah, so we are planning on having the viewings. Let's see, I'm pulling up my calendar. In April. So I will create a flyer. It'll be all via Zoom. So there'll be a Zoom registration link on that flyer. And I will send that to you. So if you just want to share it with anyone in your network, anyone you know personally, professionally, that will absolutely help us get the word out. And yeah, it'll be like April 19th, 26th, and then May 3rd. So those last 2 Fridays in April and first Friday in May will be the showing of the series. Well, hello, Philip. It's so good to have you on here today. I'm really excited to have you on this interview with us. Can you just start out with telling us a little bit about your professional background and just the nature of your work?
Yeah, sure. So regarding the profession that I'm in, sometimes it's challenging to say exactly what profession it belongs to. but I'll go by the title community health worker because it's cross sectional, cross sector even. A lot of advocacy work. Advocacy is at the core of all that I do, leading the organization Operation Gateway. And my background, believe it or not, is really lived experience, and I have a significant amount of lived experience, being a survivor of mass incarceration, being a person in long-term recovery from addiction, being a person who has been a service recipient as well as a service provider. And that stems from behavioral health to academia, with working in the community college, as well as now doing a lot more in the workforce development space.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that those with lived experiences do make such a difference being in this field, right? I think that that is how change happens and how we reach those who are our target population, who we're trying to help and who we're trying to get services to, right? And advocate for. Who better than people who have had that experience and who have been there at some point in their life, right? So that's wonderful. That's awesome. Well, in getting into talking about just vicarious trauma, burnout, and compassion fatigue, has there ever been a time in your life or a specific incident where you recognize that you yourself had signs of vicarious trauma, burnout, or compassion fatigue?
Oh, yes, most certainly. Because I found my calling while I was actually in prison. So I was a peer counselor while I was in prison. While I was actually incarcerated, I was employed as a peer counselor. And so it was a program it's called A New Direction, and it's under the Hazelden umbrella. And so I was a peer counselor in there, and I found my purpose, right? And it was a lot of passion and excitement because I didn't really know what I was going to do professionally or with my career. And so when I found that calling of mine, it was hard to turn down, you see? And so when I did get out of prison, and I was able to get a job working in the behavioral health space, I was working as a behavioral health tech, and I was trying to save the world. I had a cape on. I was trying to save every single patient that came into the detox center, and it was hard because you would pour, I'm gonna say use I statements. I would pour and pour and pour, and some people just wouldn't get it because they just wasn't ready. And then I was at times wanting that to be my validation, their success be my validation. And that was a warning sign as well. And yes, I was definitely experiencing that then and burnout, and I was working a lot. So back then, I was fresh out of prison. I had money to make kids to feed, right? And finding my calling, it was something that I loved doing, helping people. But doing a lot of that without taking care of self was overwhelming. Also working in a facility that was state funded, and you have these discharge plans, and people are discharging from the facility with a shaky home plan, and it's not giving me peace because I'm fighting against a system that's not get ready to change, and these people that didn't have the resources that they need to get the necessary treatment plans that they needed going out, and that right there took a toll on me as well, like the recidivism, even in the crisis stabilization unit. But yeah, man, I definitely experienced burnout and compassion fatigue in that role.
Yeah, I absolutely think that when we don't have the resources behind what we're doing, our purpose within our job and who we're trying to help, we can only do so much. And that really puts us more at risk, right? If we don't have the right support and the resources for what we are trying to do, we're more likely going to overextend ourselves. And absolutely, when we start noticing that we don't have that balance in life, right? Because you are passionate about what you're doing and you're putting your all into that. But at the same time, I know as a mom as well, I have a 2-year-old and I have a family, I have a husband that I also need to prioritize. And so it is a very delicate balance. Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. I heard someone say whenever the demand is greater than the supply, that's the recipe for burnout.
It is. That is a very, very true statement. And I think a lot of people watching this are going to absolutely relate. Just as you were talking about that, I was like, oh, I definitely feel that. I definitely relate with that a lot. Are there any initial symptoms or indicators that made you realize something was affecting your well-being?
Well, I was starting to get more irritable. The irritability, I'd say was one is specifically with those at home, right? And I'm going home empty and I don't have anything to give to the people that love me the most. So that was one of the signs, that irritability, the sleep, not being able to sleep well, the stress, the high blood pressure as well. I remember in those days, I had started to see who is now my primary care physician, because he specialized in hypertension. And what led me to checking into that was me seeing I had high blood pressure. And fun fact, right? So at that same facility, remember I said that I was a behavioral health tech. While I was a behavioral health tech, one of the job duties was to check people's blood pressure. So, had access to the blood pressure cuff and everything to be able to check your own. And like, I was checking mine as well. And that's how I was able to see like, man, I'm just getting out of hand, not being able to sleep, the irritability, all of those were signs. And also just the other part was just working too much. I had people that was calling me out on it, people in my network. I'm a person in long-term recovery, so I have accountability partners. And so those same people are still in my life today. And I can remember them asking questions like, are you taking care of yourself? You're working a lot and you're going to school too. Oh man, you need to take care of yourself. So all of those were signs that it was starting to get out of hand.
Absolutely. That's great that you have those people in your life still to this day. I think we all need those people who can hold us accountable and really help us recognize maybe what we don't see because we are maybe blinded in this situation a little bit. And I think definitely the irritability. I think a lot of times when we are kind of blowing up on the people that we love, we're bringing it home with us. We don't recognize sometimes that it's not about what that person said to you. It's not about that situation in the moment. It really is connected to the buildup of everything that you are carrying and everything that you are juggling and that you are doing within your life. It's really 90% to do with your experiences in the past and in the last coming months and even way before that, with our childhood background and everything we have within us that maybe we haven't worked through as well. Yeah. And then also I love that you shared just the blood pressure because again, that really shows that our mental health and our emotional health is very connected and tied to our physical well-being. And even your sleep. I can imagine with not sleeping, that's going to impact your energy levels during the day. That's going to impact how much clarity you have in your job, at home, and impact your ability to problem solve and just really the quality of your work too. So thanks for sharing that. Was there any ways that, I know you hit on this already, but that you saw it really impact your personal life and your relationships outside of work?
Yeah, definitely. So it showed up because I was in school too, and I can remember, blowing up in this class. This was an interesting class though, just to be clear. It was a sociology class. And I can remember blowing up in that sociology class one time. And it's funny because me and the instructor, Portia is her name, me and her are still tight to this day. She's actually one of the leaders with the prison education program now. But me and her, we laugh on those times back in the day when I was fresh out of prison and I was working and I was going to school and, blowing up in class, during debates and me to the point of leaving class upset. Also, like I say, with my family, coming home and I'm too tired to do stuff. I'm just burnt out. And if I am doing stuff with the family, I'm not as interested or I'm not as engaged. I'm not as present there because I'm still carrying, everything from work with me and it shows up, right? You can't hide it, especially in the hard work because hard work is hard work. You hear me? Hard work is hard work. And so that's why it's important to take care of the recovery component. And there were times whenever I was working so much that I wasn't, and it was showing up in the way that I treat people, my loved ones, people in school, because I'll be going from work to school sometimes, you see, and it would show up in places like that.
I love that statement. The hard work is hard work. And how did you come to recognize that you needed help? What was that moment where you were like, okay, I need to get some support to do something about all of these signs and these symptoms that I am experiencing and I am noticing?
Well, I had started to see a psych nurse practitioner and it was mostly for sleep. And it was around that time whenever she was assessing me and asking me questions to where it was starting, as I'm answering these questions and she's like, I'll never forget. And it's like, oh, I'm really off here. So, there was really where I would say it was like, it was time when I had to see a professional. And also just to notice it, because I'm a happy guy, I'm a happy-go-lucky person. Anybody that know me know that. And like whenever it's consistent, I started to notice like I just wasn't as happy as I once was. And I can tell because in recovery we do inventories and we're checking ourselves. You have to reflect, daily reflections, and just noticing like the consistency with the dissatisfaction. Because like I say, when the demand is greater than the supply, that's the recipe for burnout. And so consistently experiencing the side effects of burnout and consistently trying to work against a system that was really broken, right? And me realizing that I can't, and it got to that point of surrender, even like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this ain't working. Like, I can't change it. So it's time to switch it up for a minute. You know what I'm saying? And that's when I made the decision to get a different job. But that came by way of mentorship, accountability partners, and people that I was talking to, because I knew some other clinicians that had worked in the field for a while, and they don't stay in jobs forever. Like, they'll work somewhere for a little bit of time and switch it up, work somewhere for a little bit of time and switch it up. And I learned that from them. Like, it's time to move on and try something different for a little while, because, that it's high acuity patients that we're dealing with the system with minimal resources. Like, hey, bro, take care of yourself. It's time for your next mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people think of that as like they are giving up, or that they're, I worked so hard to get here and to do what I'm doing right now. And they feel a lot of like guilt or maybe shame even in switching tracks. But I always try to help people realize that, it's being flexible. It's not giving up. It's really pivoting, right? And I absolutely think that we all have that moment where, especially when we first get out in the field and we do feel like we are those superheroes, we're going to save the world, we're going to create such a big change. I think we all have that moment where we're like, oh man, I'm not capable of doing that big change that I thought. I need to reassess.
Yeah. And it's crazy, like, especially fresh out of school, we rocking and rolling. We got all the terminology, we got the internship, we seen all the flaws and what we could do to change it. Then you get out there, you start running into them realistic expectations. It's like, whoa.
Yep. Yeah. We supervise field student interns. We have a lot of interns, and I love their zest. I love their energy. But yeah, I remember when I was there at one point, and I do frequently have this conversation with them as well, as they are about to graduate and get out into the field. And I know that it is inevitable to experience this. It really is. Whenever you met with that nurse that you mentioned, what steps did you take after that to recover from the burnout and from all that you were experiencing?
Well, my meeting attendance changed. I modified the amount of hours that I was working, because there was a time where I was like, I would pick up a third, like, so we had PRN people too. And if the PRN people wasn't available, then other people could pick up those shifts. And so it got to the point where I was picking up shifts on third, you see, and I was working first. So I modified the amount that I was working. I also started engaging more in the recovery community. And because I had to see that, that my job wasn't my recovery. My career is a part of my recovery, but it wasn't my recovery. And that was another thing, and getting a different job. So there's that. And that's how I made my way. That's why when I did my introduction and I was talking about my, what I do, my background, I left working in the behavioral health space and I went to work at the community college, you see, as a school official. And I went there to take a break from the crisis and the state funds. And I went and I started working with students, and there were practical, tangible deliverables. There was help somebody complete a FAFSA application. Person gets their financial aid check mark. There were people that needed assistance with their registering for school and getting a new student orientation. I get them in both of them. there's check mark. There wasn't like a discharge plan of somebody going home to a family where there's substance misuse going on and they can't get into another program because that program doesn't have any beds right now. You know what I'm saying? So I had to switch it up for my mental health. And anything that I seen this on Instagram, it said anything that costs your mental health is too expensive. And so I had to make a change, Savannah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad that you did find a job that really worked great for your well-being. You know, I think that we all need to be able to pivot and know that, you know, things serve us for a period of time, and we need to know that point where we need to pivot and take care of ourselves and our well-being. And the workplace environment where we are working absolutely plays such a big role in where we are at mentally and emotionally. And there is a workplace environment, really beliefs and roles that the workplace will take on. I think some are more like you're on your own. Some provide you more of that support, right? And more resources than others. And so it really is. I know that there are a supportive work environment is very important and crucial to our well-being and the quality of the work and what we are able to do for our clients and for ourselves.
Amen.
Is there any specific interventions or professional support that played a crucial role in just recovering?
Well, you know, profession-wise, you know, like I did leverage having the psych nurse practitioner that I work with and spoke with her. But also the opportunity that I had working at that specific facility was I had access to the psychiatrist. You know, I wasn't on their caseload per se, but you know, there was a couple of them to where, you know, I would check in with them about how I was feeling and stuff, because like when they come in, sometimes they would check with me, but especially when I moved on to the role as case manager. So when they come in, they would have like all the people who are in the facility, and they would have to check in with each of them to do their thing, you know, for especially the crisis patients. And when they were done, they would check in with me like, hey, you got anything else to say about them? How's he doing throughout the day? Because I would make my way into the day room to do groups and stuff like that. And so at the end of that, there were times where I would just check in about how I was feeling and what was going on. And it was a safe space, you know. And for me, being a Black man, you know, there's a heavy stigma in the Black community when you start talking about mental health. And so this was a time where I found a safe zone to talk about it, you see. And so where I was talking about it and the feedback they were giving me, it was helping me understand the value of taking care of my mental health and prioritizing it. And so I would say that was the most professional interactions that was happening, because I didn't immediately seek out a therapist at the time or anything like that. I just did get to benefit. That was some of the benefits of working there. You had access to the professionals like that. But that would be the biggest one. That the intervention with my health, like my blood pressure and the stress and all of that, not sleeping, and then, you know, doing something about it then, and the professionals that I had access to when I was working at that crisis unit.
Absolutely. I think we all need someone to be able to confide in, that provides a safe space for us to do that, whether it is a friend, a supervisor, a colleague that you work with, or a therapist, right? Someone that is in that professional role with you. So that's awesome that you did find that safe, validating person within your life that you could come and open up to, because there is, like you said, so much stigma. I know that differs per population, right? And it is mental health in general, I think, is very stigmatized. And we are very focused on like being the helpers, helping other people. And so a lot of the time it's very hard to admit when we ourselves need that help.
Yep. I heard somebody once say that, you know, car mechanics have cars that need working on in their own yard.
Yep, that is very, absolutely. And how would you say that you now, at this point in your life, currently manage and mitigate that impact of your work affecting your well-being?
Well, you know, back then, I'd say I had maybe like 5 years clean and sober back then. Now I got 15, and I practice a strong recovery program, Savannah. You hear me? I make my recovery meetings with me being in the grassroots area now. I'm availed the opportunity to have flexibility. So, I get to go to midday recovery meetings like on my lunch break, and I take a nap a week. I get my weekly naps. I tell people Jesus took naps, be like Jesus. The gym. I actually do have a therapist now that I see, and medication as well. All the things that's required, fam. Like, because like the work that I do, especially when you start looking at advocacy work and being a person in long-term recovery, like advocacy work requires you to be emotional often. And, whenever you're consistently emotional, you got to really, really be taking care of your mental health, because the heart can be, the heart can be deceitful, and so like, I understand that I have to make my recovery meetings. I have to be in church on Sundays. I have to, see my therapist twice a month, and do what I have to do to keep my sanity, because I can't pour from an empty cup. And those are the things that I do to take care of it now. I make about 3 recovery meetings a week. So I do Celebrate Recovery. And then I also do another 12-step fellowship that I go to on Tuesdays. So I have that. And I serve in the community. I go actually into the detox that I used to work at, and I take a Celebrate Recovery meeting in there. So that's the way that I do service. That's the way that I express my gratitude, right? By doing service. And then regarding, my therapist, he's amazing. Like I say, medication, that's another thing that I'm doing, and it helps. It helps me be able to cope with life on life's terms in a way that I struggled with prior to. And I'm grateful, for the professionals. I'm an outspoken person about slaying the mental health stigma, and I will continue to do that, because a lot of people they slip up because the stigma, and they go self-medicate, and they end up, messing around with those criminogenic activities. Next thing you know, they in prison, and it could have been prevented if they would have been taking care of their mental wellness in the first place. So all of those things I'm doing right now, my sister, it's February the 29th, leap year. And I can tell you, I was in how many recovery meetings I done made this week? Let's see, Monday, Tuesday. I made 2 on Tuesday, actually, because I spoke at a recovery meeting on Tuesday night, and I went to a meeting Tuesday in the daytime. So I'm doing my thing right now.
That's awesome.
Yes, anti-burnout.
We all need to be doing that. We all have those things that support us, whether it's like, okay, I'm a person who needs naps, right? I'm a person who I get so fulfilled in going to church and integrating myself into that community of support, into my religious beliefs, whatever that is for someone. Building in that time for yourself, doing those things that bring you joy, and that's going to differ the person. And congratulations on 15 years too. I just want to say that. But I think that all of this that you're doing today, I mean, it's evident that you have been very intentional about incorporating these things into your daily life, on a weekly basis, right? To get you to this point over the last 15 years, because it is such a slippery slope, right? Like, once you start, we all want relief as humans. And so if we aren't mentally, emotionally well, it then impacts our physical health, and then we want relief. We're going to naturally try to find that some way, somehow. And it might be in a maladaptive way, right? That then just plummets. Before we know it, we're at the rock. We're like, how did I get here? Right. And I think that's where the awareness comes in on how you personally are impacted by stress, and making sure whether it's like you have that awareness and you catch yourself where that burnout is growing, right? When you start having that irritability at home, when it starts impacting your relationships at home, or you have people in your life who point it out to you, right? Who care about you and who let you know, because awareness, I think recognizing it is the first step to being able to do anything about it. And creating this routine that you have done for yourself, I think that's amazing, and such a great thing for all of us to take with us, on really making sure that we're prioritizing those things that support us, that help us be resilient and do the work that we do. every single day.
Right on. Right on.
Is there any advice that you would give to other professionals who are watching this, who may be experiencing vicarious trauma or burnout or compassion fatigue right now?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say hard work is hard work. And with knowing that, understanding the value of connections and support groups, a community, not trying to do this heavy lifting work as a loner, an isolator, staying connected, staying energized by others. You don't have to be an extrovert like me, but have somebody in your circle that's pouring into your cup. Because this work, that involves vicarious trauma, this is that healing work. This is that hard work, and hard work is hard work. So that means you have to go the extra mile to take care of yourself. Just like a boxer, boxers, they train hard. And the way that we train is by staying connected, by having, a sponsor, a coach, a mentor, going to groups, unloading, letting things out that's troubling us, not harboring resentments, living a spiritual principled life. And you don't have to be a person in long-term recovery to practice spiritual principles like honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, surrender, acceptance, forgiveness, trust, loyalty, integrity. These are universal, no matter what you believe in, right? And so as a person that's doing this work, just understanding that at the end of the day, you have to take care of yourself because you can't pour from an empty cup. And don't walk around harboring resentments. That's the worst. Like, you really, really have to let things out. And in order to have safe places to let things out, you have to prioritize connections and building community. And that's why the first thing I said was not doing it by yourself. You got to have connections.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit all the nail on the head with all of that you just said right there. I mean, that is what it's all about. I think that this is going to be very valuable for people to watch and to listen. And I really appreciate you sharing your story, talking about your past, things that you've experienced, how you've triumphed over it, how you still to this day manage and navigate the work that you do, and staying within this profession. So truly, thank you so much, Philip, for being here today and sharing all of this with us.
Right on, Savannah. Thanks for having me, and thanks for prioritizing a conversation like this.